Sometimes, a single question can change a life forever. On a cool Tuesday afternoon in Columbus, Ohio, Ethan Walker stepped out of a neighborhood pharmacy carrying a small paper bag and thinking about nothing more important than making it to his next meeting on time. As the CEO of one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country, his days were scheduled down to the minute. Every call mattered. Every decision affected thousands of employees. Yet none of that prepared him for what happened next. Just as he reached the edge of the parking lot, a small figure suddenly darted across the entrance lane. Ethan immediately stopped in his tracks. The little boy couldn't have been older than 7. His blonde hair was messy, his sneakers were worn, and he looked like he had been carrying the weight of the world on shoulders far too small for a child. The boy wasn't scared. He wasn't crying. Instead, he looked directly into Ethan's eyes with a seriousness that felt impossible for someone his age. Then he asked a question so simple that Ethan would remember it for the rest of his life. "Can you help my mommy stand up?" For a moment, Ethan wasn't sure he had heard correctly. Around them, people continued walking in and out of the pharmacy. Shopping carts rolled across the pavement. Cars pulled into parking spaces. But the noise seemed to fade away. The little boy's words hung in the air. Ethan lowered himself slightly so he could meet the child's gaze. "What did you say, buddy?" he asked gently. "My mommy can't stand up," the boy replied. "I tried to help her, but I'm not strong enough." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. The child wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for food or toys. He was asking for help. Real help. The kind only a desperate child would seek from a complete stranger. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Noah," the boy said. "My mommy is over there." Noah pointed toward a weathered bench near the side of the building. Ethan followed the direction of his finger and noticed a woman sitting alone beneath a faded awning. She appeared to be in her early 30s. Her light brown hair was tied back loosely, and she looked exhausted. One hand rested against the bench while the other held a prescription bag against her lap. Even from a distance, Ethan could see that something wasn't right. The woman seemed determined not to draw attention to herself, yet every movement looked difficult. Noah shifted nervously from one foot to the other. "I told her to wait," he said quietly. "She always tells me everything is okay, but I don't think it is." Ethan glanced back at the boy. There was no self-pity in his voice. No complaint, just concern. The kind of concern a child shouldn't have to carry. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan suddenly knew he wasn't going to walk away. Ethan walked beside Noah toward the bench, expecting the woman to wave them away or insist that everything was fine. Instead, as they approached, he noticed how carefully she was conserving every movement. She looked up when she saw Noah returning and immediately forced a small smile. "Noah, I told you not to bother people," she said softly. Her voice was warm, but Ethan could hear the exhaustion beneath it. "I am sorry," Noah replied. "I just wanted to help." The woman glanced at Ethan with visible embarrassment. "I apologize for my son. He has a very big heart." Ethan offered a polite smile. "There is nothing to apologize for. My name is Ethan. Claire Bennett," she replied. "And this troublemaker is Noah." Noah sat beside her and gently placed a hand on her arm as if he were the parent and she were the child. The gesture caught Ethan off guard. Most children his age would have been thinking about cartoons, baseball cards, or video games. Noah seemed focused entirely on his mother. "Are you waiting for someone?" Ethan asked. Claire hesitated before answering. "No, we are just resting for a minute." Ethan looked around the nearly empty parking lot. "Do you have a ride home?" Claire lowered her eyes. "We usually take the bus." Ethan noticed the nearest bus stop sitting almost a quarter-mile away. For most people, the distance would have been insignificant. For Claire, it appeared overwhelming. Noah leaned closer to Ethan and lowered his voice. "She says she is okay, but she has been saying that all day." Claire gave her son a gentle look. "Noah." "What?" he asked innocently. "You were supposed to tell the truth." Ethan could not help smiling. There was something remarkably sincere about the boy. He was not trying to gain sympathy. He was simply stating facts as he saw them. Claire carefully adjusted the prescription bag in her lap. Ethan noticed that it contained only one small bottle. For some reason, that detail stayed with him. The woman looked like someone carrying far more burdens than a single prescription could solve. "Would you allow me to drive you home?" Ethan asked. Claire immediately shook her head. "That is very kind, but no thank you." The answer came so quickly that it felt rehearsed. as though she had spent months refusing help. "It would not be any trouble," Ethan said. "I appreciate that, but we will manage." Noah looked down at the sidewalk. Ethan noticed the disappointment on the boy's face. Not because he wanted a ride, but because he genuinely hoped someone might make his mother's day a little easier. A silence settled over the three of them. Then a strong gust of wind swept through the parking lot. Before Claire could brace herself, the prescription slip tucked beneath her bag blew free and skidded across the pavement. Ethan hurried after it and caught the paper before it disappeared beneath a parked car. As he turned it over to return it, his eyes briefly landed on a few printed details. He had no intention of reading private medical information, but one line immediately stood out. The medication was related to rehabilitation and long-term mobility treatment. Ethan handed the paper back without comment, yet a question formed in his mind. What had happened to Claire Bennett, and why did a 7-year-old boy seem more worried than she was? Claire seemed eager to end the conversation before Ethan could ask any more questions. She thanked him again for retrieving the paper and carefully tucked it into the prescription bag. Then she looked toward the bus stop in the distance, as if calculating how much energy the trip home would require. Ethan sensed that whatever struggle she was facing, pride was playing a role in it. She was determined to handle it alone. "Well," Ethan said, "at least let me wait here until your bus arrives." Claire hesitated. Refusing a ride was one thing. Refusing someone the chance to stand nearby was another. "That is not necessary," she replied. "But thank you." Noah looked between them. "You can stay," he said. "Mom likes nice people." Claire gave him a look that made Ethan laugh quietly. For the first time, he saw a hint of the woman she might have been before life became difficult. A few minutes passed. The afternoon sun drifted lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Noah sat beside his mother, swinging his legs gently. Then something caught Ethan's attention. The boy reached into his backpack and carefully removed a small notebook. It was old and worn at the corners. Noah opened it and studied a page filled with numbers. Every few seconds he would glance at the pharmacy sign and then back at the notebook. "What are you working on?" Ethan asked. Noah quickly closed it. "Nothing." The answer came too fast. Ethan smiled. "That sounds like something important." Noah looked toward his mother before responding. "It is just my list." "What kind of list?" Noah hesitated again. "A money list." Claire immediately shifted in her seat. "Noah, you do not need to talk about that." The boy lowered his eyes. "Okay." The exchange lasted only seconds, but Ethan felt his curiosity grow. A 7-year-old carrying a money list was not normal. Neither was the seriousness with which he protected it. Before Ethan could say anything else, a city bus passed on the opposite side of the street without stopping. Claire watched it disappear and quietly exhaled. It was the kind of sigh people make when they are already tired before the next challenge begins. Ethan checked the schedule posted nearby. The next bus would not arrive for another 40 minutes. 40 minutes? He asked. Claire nodded. That is usually how it goes. Noah looked disappointed, but not surprised. That bothered Ethan more than anything. The child had become accustomed to waiting, accustomed to uncertainty, accustomed to carrying concerns far beyond his years. Another gust of wind swept through the parking lot. This time Noah grabbed his backpack before anything could blow away. As he did, a folded piece of paper slipped from one of the side pockets and landed near Ethan's shoes. Noah immediately jumped up. Wait! But Ethan had already picked it up. It was not a school assignment or a drawing. It was a handwritten page covered with neat, careful printing. At the very top were the words, "Things I can sell to help Mom." Ethan froze. Beneath the title was a list. Baseball cards, toy truck collection, birthday savings, lemonade stand supplies. Each item had a dollar amount written beside it in pencil. Noah gently took the paper back and folded it before Ethan could see anything else. The boy looked embarrassed. Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment, and Ethan suddenly realized there was far more to this story than either of them was willing to say. The bus was still more than half an hour away, but Ethan found himself no longer thinking about the meeting he was missing. His attention remained fixed on the small family sitting beside him. Noah held his backpack tightly against his chest now, as if afraid any more secrets might escape. Claire stared toward the street, clearly wishing the conversation would move on. Ethan respected that, yet the image of the handwritten list lingered in his mind. A 7-year-old should not be calculating the value of his belongings. He should be deciding which toy to play with after school. Noah seems like a thoughtful kid, Ethan said carefully. Claire smiled faintly. He has always been that way. Most children his age are not making plans to help pay bills. Claire's smile faded. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she looked down at her hands. He hears more than I wish he did. Noah shifted beside her. I am just helping. The simple sincerity in his voice made Ethan's chest tighten again. Claire reached over and squeezed her son's shoulder. You help more than you know. Ethan noticed how quickly Noah relaxed when his mother touched him. Despite everything they were facing, the bond between them was unmistakable. They were carrying the burden together. A few moments later, Noah suddenly stood. I will be right back. Before either adult could respond, he hurried toward a vending machine near the pharmacy entrance. Ethan watched him dig through his pockets and count several coins. After a minute, the machine dispensed a small bottle of water. Noah returned proudly and handed it to his mother. You should drink some. Claire looked at the bottle and then at her son. Noah, that was your allowance money. He shrugged. You need it more than I do. Claire's eyes glistened for a moment before she quickly looked away. Ethan pretended not to notice, but the scene stayed with him. The boy was not acting like a child trying to impress someone. This was normal for him. Caring for his mother had become part of his daily routine. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan learned small details through casual conversation. Noah loved science class. He enjoyed building things from cardboard boxes. He wanted to become an inventor someday. Yet every answer somehow circled back to his mother. If he became an inventor, he wanted to invent something that would help people walk more easily. If he became rich, he wanted to buy a house with no stairs. If he could travel anywhere, he wanted to take his mother to the ocean because she had not seen it in years. Ethan listened quietly. The more Noah spoke, the more questions formed in his mind. What exactly had happened to Claire? How long had they been struggling like this? And why did it feel as though they had exhausted every possible source of help before ending up alone on a bench outside a pharmacy? Then Ethan noticed something else. Every time Claire shifted her position, she winced ever so slightly before forcing a smile. She thought she was hiding it. She was not. And for the first time that afternoon, Ethan began to suspect that the situation was far more serious than either mother or son was willing to admit. Eventually, the bus arrived with a long hiss of air brakes. Ethan stood automatically, expecting the moment to end there. Instead, he found himself helping Claire gather her things while Noah slung the backpack over his shoulder. The movement seemed simple, yet Claire needed several extra seconds before she could rise from the bench. She managed it with determination, but the effort was obvious. Noah immediately moved to her side. I have you, Mom, he said. Claire smiled. I know you do. The words stayed with Ethan long after they stepped onto the bus. He watched through the window as Noah carefully guided his mother toward a seat. Then the bus pulled away and disappeared into traffic. Ethan stood alone in the parking lot, feeling strangely unsettled. He had met thousands of people throughout his career. Investors, politicians, researchers, executives. Most conversations faded from memory within hours. Yet he could not stop thinking about a 7-year-old carrying a list of things he could sell to help his mother. That evening, Ethan returned to his downtown apartment overlooking the city skyline. The view usually helped him unwind after a long day. Tonight it did not. He loosened his tie, set his phone on the kitchen counter, and stared out at the lights below. His thoughts kept returning to Claire and Noah. More specifically, they kept returning to a memory he had not visited in years. When Ethan was 10 years old, his own mother had spent months battling a serious illness. He remembered sitting beside her hospital bed, wishing there were something he could do. He remembered feeling helpless, powerless, too young to change anything. Back then, a stranger had quietly helped his family, not with money alone, but with kindness. The details had faded over time, yet the feeling never had. Someone had stepped forward when they did not have to. Someone had made a difficult season easier. Ethan suddenly realized why Noah had affected him so deeply. The boy's eyes carried the same determination Ethan remembered seeing in the mirror as a child. The same refusal to give up on someone he loved. His phone buzzed with reminders about meetings scheduled for the next morning. Ethan ignored them. Instead, he sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. He told himself he was simply curious. Nothing more. Yet within minutes, he was searching for publicly available information. Claire Bennett, Columbus, Ohio. The results were limited. There were no social media posts. No recent news articles. Very little at all. But one detail eventually appeared. In a professional licensing database, Claire Bennett had once been a registered nurse. Ethan leaned back in his chair. A nurse. Suddenly many things made more sense. The quiet dignity. The reluctance to accept help. The instinct to reassure others, even while struggling herself. Yet one question became even larger. If Claire had been a nurse, what had happened that left her dependent on buses, prescription assistants, and a child who worried about household finances? Ethan closed the laptop and looked out at the city once more. He had planned to forget the encounter and move on with his life. Instead, he found himself making a decision. The next day, he was going to learn the rest of Claire Bennett's story. The following morning, Ethan arrived at his office earlier than usual. The headquarters of his company occupied an entire glass tower in downtown Columbus, but despite the activity around him, his thoughts remained focused on Claire and Noah. He told himself that he was simply trying to understand the situation. Yet deep down, he knew it had become personal. After settling into his office, he reached out to a trusted member of his community outreach team, a woman named Karen Mitchell. Karen had spent years helping connect struggling families with medical resources and assistance programs. If anyone could help him understand what might have happened, it was her. By late afternoon, Karen entered his office carrying a thin folder. "I found some public records," she said. "Nothing private, just information that is legally available." Ethan nodded. Karen opened the folder. Claire Bennett worked as a registered nurse for nearly 9 years. Strong employment record. Excellent performance reviews. Then about 3 years ago, everything changed. Ethan leaned forward. "What happened?" Karen glanced at the documents. According to public filings, she suffered a serious injury during a traffic accident. She survived, but her recovery was complicated. Physical therapy helped at first, but progress eventually slowed. Ethan remained silent. "The bigger problem came afterward," Karen continued. "She exhausted much of her insurance coverage. Then she lost her position because she could no longer perform certain physical requirements of the job. After that, her income dropped significantly." Ethan stared at the skyline beyond his office window. The pieces were beginning to fit together. "What about family support?" he asked. Karen shook her head. "Nothing substantial that I could find. It appears she has been handling most things on her own while raising Noah." Ethan thought about the little notebook. The list of possessions a child was willing to sell. Suddenly, it seemed even more heartbreaking. Karen flipped to another page. "There is something else." Ethan looked up. "Go on." Several charitable assistance programs were available that might have helped cover advanced rehabilitation treatment. Ethan frowned. "Might have." Karen nodded slowly. "It appears applications were submitted, but for some reason the process never moved forward." "Why not?" Karen hesitated. "That is what I could not understand. On paper, she appears to have qualified." Ethan felt a growing sense of unease. He had spent years advocating for access to treatment programs. If someone qualified, there should have been a path forward. Yet somehow Claire had slipped through the cracks. Karen closed the folder. "I cannot say exactly what happened, but something does not add up." After she left, Ethan remained at his desk long after sunset. The city lights flickered on one by one outside his window. Claire had done everything she was supposed to do. She had worked hard. She had followed the rules. She had applied for help. Yet she was still struggling to reach a bus stop, while her 7-year-old son worried about paying for medicine. The more Ethan thought about it, the less he could accept it. Then his eyes landed on one final note in Karen's report. It listed the rehabilitation center where Claire had last received treatment before her coverage ended. Ethan picked up the folder and read the name again. Something about it felt important. For the first time, he suspected that the answers he was looking for were hidden inside a file that nobody had bothered to examine closely. The next morning, Ethan made a call he normally would not have made personally. Within hours, he was sitting across from the director of the rehabilitation center listed in Claire's records. He had no intention of invading anyone's privacy, and he was careful to respect every legal boundary. What concerned him was the possibility that a qualified patient had somehow lost access to treatment because of a mistake. The director, a gray-haired woman named Linda Foster, reviewed several administrative records while Ethan waited. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then Linda frowned. She clicked through another file. Then another. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. "That is strange," she said quietly. Ethan felt his attention sharpen. "What is?" Linda turned her monitor slightly. "According to this record, Claire Bennett's application for extended rehabilitation support was marked incomplete. Ethan remembered Karen's report, but she submitted the paperwork. Linda nodded. That is exactly why this is strange. She opened another file. The documents were received. The evaluations were completed. The recommendations were entered. Everything appears to have been here. Ethan stared at the screen. Then why was it marked incomplete? Linda slowly shook her head. I do not know. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then Linda opened a final archived record. The moment she did, her expression changed. There it is. Ethan leaned forward. What? A clerical error. Ethan frowned. Meaning? Linda pointed toward the screen. One supporting medical document was accidentally coded under the wrong case number years ago. When the system reviewed her application, it appeared that a required evaluation was missing. Ethan felt disbelief wash over him. And because of that, Linda nodded. The request was automatically denied. The room fell silent. 3 years. 3 years of struggle. 3 years of buses, prescriptions, setbacks, and uncertainty. 3 years during which a little boy had slowly become convinced he needed to sell his toys to help his mother. All because one document had been placed in the wrong file. Linda looked genuinely disturbed. If this had been caught earlier, the outcome could have been very different. Ethan looked out. The office window. He was not angry. He was saddened by how easily lives could be altered by something so small. Before leaving, he asked one final question. If Claire were approved today, would treatment still help? Linda answered immediately. Absolutely. It would not be easy. Recovery never is. But she still has options. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat alone in his office, thinking about everything he had learned. That was when his phone rang. The caller was Karen. You are not going to believe this, she said. I was following up on community assistance records. Ethan sat forward. What did you find? Karen exhaled slowly. Remember Noah's notebook? Of course. It turns out the list was only part of it. For nearly a year, he has been setting aside birthday money, lemonade stand earnings, and every small gift he receives. Ethan felt a knot form in his chest. How much has he saved? There was a pause. Then Karen answered softly. Enough to believe he could buy his mother a miracle. 3 days later, Ethan stood outside a modest apartment building on the west side of Columbus. He had called ahead this time, and after considerable hesitation, Claire had agreed to meet with him. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see that he had come alone. No cameras, no reporters, no assistants, just Ethan carrying a folder. Noah appeared a second later and immediately smiled. Mom, it is him. Ethan smiled back. Good to see you, Noah. They sat around a small kitchen table that had clearly seen years of use. The apartment was clean and organized, but every detail suggested careful budgeting. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was extravagant. Claire listened quietly as Ethan explained what he had discovered. At first she seemed confused, then skeptical, then completely speechless. There must be some mistake, she said. Ethan gently slid a document across the table. There was a mistake. That is exactly the problem. Claire stared at the paperwork. Her hands trembled slightly. You are saying my application should never have been denied. Ethan nodded. That is what the records indicate. For several moments, she could not speak. Noah looked from one adult to the other. Is that good news? He asked. Claire blinked rapidly and managed a small smile. I think it might be. Ethan then explained that the rehabilitation center had agreed to reevaluate her case immediately. Additional support programs would also be reviewed. Nothing was guaranteed overnight, but for the first time in years, doors were opening instead of closing. Noah's face lit up. Does that mean Mom can get better? The room fell silent. Ethan chose his words carefully. It means she will finally have the chance she deserved. A week later, Claire attended her first evaluation. The specialists reviewed updated scans, mobility tests, and treatment options. The process was exhausting, but something had changed. Hope had returned. Weeks turned into months. Physical therapy sessions became part of a new routine. Some days were encouraging. Others were frustrating. Progress came slowly. There were moments when Claire questioned whether the effort was worth it. Yet every time she felt discouraged, Noah reminded her why she started. He kept drawings on the refrigerator. He left handwritten notes beside her morning coffee. One read, I believe in you, Mom. Another simply said, one more step. Ethan stayed involved from a respectful distance. He checked in occasionally, but never tried to take credit for anything. The hard work belonged to Claire. She was the one showing up day after day. She was the one refusing to quit. Then came a bright spring morning nearly 8 months after their first meeting. Claire arrived at the rehabilitation center for what seemed like another ordinary session. Noah sat nearby with a book in his lap. Ethan happened to be visiting that day after receiving an invitation from the therapy team. No one wanted to create pressure. No one expected miracles. The therapist guided Claire through a familiar exercise. One movement, then another. Claire focused on her breathing. The room remained quiet. Then something remarkable happened. A step that had once seemed impossible suddenly became possible. Then another followed. Noah looked up from his chair. His eyes widened. Claire was moving forward under her own strength. Slowly, carefully, but undeniably forward. Tears filled her eyes as months of effort finally became visible. Across the room, Noah dropped his book and stood frozen in disbelief before a smile spread across his face unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. 1 year later, the Rehabilitation Center hosted a small community celebration recognizing patients who had reached important milestones in their recovery journeys. The room was filled with families, therapists, nurses, and supporters whose encouragement had helped make those milestones possible. Ethan almost declined the invitation when it arrived, believing the event should focus on the people who had done the difficult work. In the end, he attended quietly and took a seat near the back. As the program began, he watched familiar faces move across the stage. Then he saw Claire. The difference was remarkable. She walked with confidence, her posture stronger, her smile brighter, and her eyes no longer burdened by the constant uncertainty that had defined the day they first met. The audience applauded warmly as she accepted a certificate recognizing her perseverance. Ethan smiled to himself. She had earned every step. After the presentation, the event coordinator announced one final speaker. A young boy. Noah's name echoed through the room. The audience smiled as he walked toward the microphone. He was taller now, more confident. Yet Ethan immediately recognized the same kind heart that had stopped him in a pharmacy parking lot more than a year earlier. Noah unfolded a small piece of paper and looked out at the crowd. "My mom says heroes do not always wear capes," he began. A few people laughed softly. "She says sometimes heroes are doctors, therapists, nurses, teachers, or people who help when they do not have to." The room grew quiet. Noah continued. "Last year, I thought I had to fix everything by myself. I thought if I saved enough money and sold enough things, maybe I could make my mom better." Several people wiped tears from their eyes. Noah looked toward Claire and smiled. "But I learned something important. Sometimes people help because they care. And when they care, big things can happen." He paused and searched the audience until he found Ethan. "There is someone here I want to thank." Ethan immediately felt every eye in the room turn toward him. Noah stepped away from the microphone and walked directly across the stage. When he reached Ethan, he stopped and smiled. The room became completely silent. Then Noah spoke the words Ethan had carried with him ever since the day they first met. "You helped my mommy stand up." Ethan felt emotion catch in his throat. He stood and shook Noah's hand, but the boy surprised him by wrapping both arms around him in a grateful hug. The audience erupted into applause. Across the room, Claire stood with tears in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, tears of relief, of gratitude, of a future that once seemed impossible. Later that evening, as people slowly left the event, Ethan watched Claire and Noah walk toward the parking lot together. Side by side, no wheelchair, no bench, no waiting for the next bus while wondering how they would get through another difficult day. Just a mother and her son moving forward. And as they disappeared into the golden light of the setting sun, Ethan realized that the most extraordinary thing was not that one life had changed. It was that a simple act of kindness had changed 3 lives at once.